Oh, aloha. Welcome back to the Salawag's Why It's Great. Aloha, nerds, and welcome back to the Salawag's Why It's Great. I'm your host, the Salawag, and on this show I discuss the filmmaking techniques and storytelling choices that make my favorite films great. Now, if you haven't been watching, on this show I discuss the filmmaking techniques and storytelling choices that make my favorite films great. What does that mean? That means I'm not here to talk just about my favorite scenes or things that I really resonate with me, but I'm here to actually talk about what the filmmakers chose to do and what they themselves meant, or what techniques I can see that they were using in the movie. And most of the time these movies are older movies, something I've watched a lot, something I've studied. And who am I? If you haven't been watching, I am a dude who has nerdy crap behind him. So, just trust what I say. So I really wanted to get into Spider-Man. If you watched the last video, I talked about the faithfulness of the adaptation. This time around, I want to talk about blocking and framing. Now, a director's job, to most people from the outside, just looks like he yaps to the actor for a minute, and maybe picks a camera angle, and that's about it. Well, that's just the easy stuff that you do after all the homework that you're supposed to do. The director has to have what's called a vision. So, what is a vision? What does that mean? And how does blocking and framing actually play into this vision? Well, essentially, in the case of Spider-Man, on the commentary of the first Spider-Man, producer Laura Ziskin talks about how Sam Raimi really wanted the drama that exists between the main casts to be sort of like Melrose Place or 90210, where they had a very tightly connected drama that sort of played in tandem with the plot later on with the Green Goblin. So essentially you had sort of these three sort of rotating characters who all have a central story, or a central part of the story of Peter Parker wants to date Mary Jane, and you have Harry Osborn. He wants his father's attention, and you have Mary Jane Watson, who just wants to find herself and not be around people who are abusive assholes. Essentially, you have this sort of rotating story. And so that's what Sam Raimi brought to the movie. He wanted it to have that sort of personal, emotional kind of vibe and make it realistic to a certain degree. Now, I talked about, in the last video, having that realistic interaction of Uncle Ben, talking to Peter like, hey, why are you skipping out on your chores? Why are you getting in fights at school? That's a very real life type of situation. It's something I've been in, not about fights in school, but you make mistakes, and sometimes you need a little talking to from a parental unit or something like that. That's sort of an experience I've had. I relate to that, and that really comes into play with the character relationships. But how do you show that stuff? How do you, as a director, what are you really supposed to be doing? Don't bark, doggy. As a director, how does that really work when it comes to blocking and framing? Now, blocking. What's blocking? What am I meaning when I say blocking? Blocking means how you position your actors versus your camera. So let's say I got a Green Goblin over here, right? And let's get another guy. Alright. So I have a Green Goblin from Sony Pictures Spider-Man 2002 figurine with Iron Man 2008 6-inch figurine. So, and you're the camera. So you're the camera. Let's say the camera is here, facing this way. Notice this hand signal. You'll see in a lot of director pictures, directors holding their hands like this or this. This means camera position. So you're the camera. Camera's facing this way. You have Green Goblin here, and you have Iron Man here. Now let's say you're shooting a scene where they're talking to each other. You're going to have your wide shot. You see them in full, just walking down the street. What's going on, Iron Man? Oh, nothing. Nothing, Green Goblin. That's how they talk in the movies. I don't know if anyone else noticed that. Fucking barking. And then you have like your sort of medium shot, and you have your close up, and then you also have, so that's shot size, that's your framing. But blocking is how are they positioned with each other in your shot? Are they walking side by side? Is one walking slightly ahead of the other? Or are they stacked? Is one walking ahead of the other and kind of blocking the other? Because each of those things means something different when you choose to position people. And I'll bring up a very early scene in the movie to be an example. So when we're introduced to Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn, the rest of the school, Peter is with his class going on a field trip, and he arrives on the school bus to a science event. And after everyone has sort of disembarked from the bus and start walking toward the building, that's when a Rolls Royce pulls up in front of the building, and inside the Rolls Royce is Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn. And they're shot with basic coverage, which is medium wide, or wide shot, medium shot, close up. Basically, coverage is when you shoot all three angles and basically get enough to cut your scene. But in this scene, we get established the conflict. Harry Osborn, played by James Franco, says, "Hey, can you pull around the corner?" And Norman, played by Willem Dafoe, is like, "Hey, you don't have to do that. Just get out. You don't have to be embarrassed about who you are." And Harry, James Franco's like, I'm embarrassed about who I am. And you see Norman is trying to reach out, but it's clear from the way Harry is with them, they're both very stiff and they're very apart from each other. So they're positioned apart from each other. Visually there's division there. And so that's a very simple way of talking about blocking, right? But also we're talking about their relationship, that is how these characters are, that there's been a distance between these two. We don't know really what it was, but it's indicated in the way they're positioned and the way they're shot. And then when Harry gets out of the Rolls Royce and meets up with Peter, Norman falls and says, hey, you forgot your bag. And then in that moment, that's when Norman's introduced to Peter. Harry's like, hey, you've heard of my friend Peter? And Norman greets him, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And they get along very well. But you see there's one shot that's over Norman's shoulder, and it's looking at Toby Macguire, Peter. And in between them, you see Harry. And as Norman sort of asks him, hey, didn't you win at some science fair project? And your family must be really proud of you. as they're kind of bonding, you kind of notice there's a kind of instant sort of chemistry of familiarity, because Peter, he says, "Hey, Norman Osborn, I've read your science stuff. I'm really impressed by it, you know." And Harry, who's never had an interest in his life in science and all that stuff, he immediately feels left out. And it's like, whoa. And you see in that shot, over OTS, over the shoulder, over Norman's shoulder, in between Norman and Peter, you see in that shot the look on James Franco's face. He's like, oh crap, like, I'm not in this conversation, and this is my dad and my best friend, and I'm not in this conversation. And he's so happy to see him. So the seeds are being set for all the drama that's going to play out for the rest of the movie. And that's called blocking, when you choose to have, you know, over Norman's shoulder talking to Peter, in between them is me. Oh yeah, I forgot. You win the science award. Yeah. Parents must be very proud. My daddy's not proud of me. You know, that's what's going on. But that's what sort of establishes the relationship. And this is continued later. You know, at least in that scene, we see Harry in the middle between them. But there's a scene later that sort of continues this sort of language of using the over-the-shoulder shot to communicate something. And also notice that the camera is not focused on Harry, but we still see him. You still detect his reaction, even though you're focusing on Peter and you're focusing on Norman. That's the purpose of that shot, because Peter is the main character. It is about him. But just because the shot's on him doesn't mean the other actor stops acting. That's what makes professional acting. That's why some extras don't want to be called extras. They want to be called background actors, because they are acting. If they don't look believable, then you don't believe the scene. So anyway, when it comes to that kind of language of how the film camera is used, the positioning and blocking, that's repeated in a later scene when they're graduating. Peter and Harry and Mary Jane, they're all graduating. And Norman, you know, has a nice little moment with his son of saying, "Hey, this is not the first time you proved me wrong." And he's just trying to gently suggest that he's proud of his son, but they just have this strained relationship, and it's very hard for them to connect. But they seem to be getting a little bit closer. And then when he comes up to Peter, he's like very, very comforting. And he offers, "Anything you need, Peter. I heard about your Uncle Ben. I'm very sorry about that. Anything you need." And this time around, Harry is literally not in the conversation, because when Norman comes up to greet Peter, he literally sort of steps in front of Harry. And we get this over-the-shoulder shot over Peter's shoulder, looking at a sort of tighter medium on Norman, Willem Dafoe, and over Norman's shoulder, in the same shot, over Norman's shoulder, we see Harry and his reaction to watching Norman walk right in front of him to see his best friend, and that he's, again, literally not even in the conversation, and that's his dad and his best friend. And you can see on his face, he just feels like, Jesus, like, you just totally forgot about me, and are all over my best friend. And then Harry looks to the side, and he sees Mary Jane, and she's breaking up with her boyfriend, and it's a bad little fight. And then we go to a close-up on Harry, seeing what's happened. It's like you see this idea appear in his head. And that he doesn't look at Mary Jane with some longing affection that Peter has earlier in the same movie. But he looks at sort of just an opportunity to get something. And sort of all this is done with blocking, positioning, framing. All of these choices have to be made to get you to feel something about what's going on with the character. Because it could have just been filmed as coverage. It could have just been filmed in some kind of basic wide shot. and then you just cut to a close-up showing Peter go, I'm sad and alone, which most people do, but Sam Raimi chose these very specific framings that just create a greater impression in your mind of what's going on. You don't feel it, you don't notice it, and it's fast, but it's happening, and everyone's acting, and the story is moving. And it's important to have a good sense of how you block your actors, because that's what creates the effect in your head when you feel someone feeling something, and so blocking and framing, medium shot, over the shoulder shot, I go over these terms in my Jurassic Park video. If you want to see more of understanding what's a medium shot, what's a close-up, what's all that. But I just want to talk about that's sort of how a director communicates information to you. So that is a technical reason for why Spider-Man's great. In the next video, I'm talking about costumes.